This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So, first of all, there's going to be some overlap between my talk and Vidyadharka's talk, but I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a saying, I think, that non-repetition is the canker of the sacred texts. So this isn't a sacred text, but it's probably good to have a bit of repetition. So the root verses of the 6 bardos are so called because they summarize what happens in the 6 bardos. And I'm not going to give a detailed explanation, but I'm just going to bring out a few points. And I hope there'll be more questions that will come up in the groups. So Bhante was very keen on the 6 bardos, on the root verses, and he taught them on a meditation practice on the Dhyana for Beginners seminar in 1974. Meditation on death is a traditional antidote to the hindrance of craving, but he wanted to do a meditation on death that's placed in an inspiring context of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. So the way that we used to do the practice was to settle down first of all in meditation, and then the leader would just slowly read through the root verses 7 times, and you just sit and reflect on the root verses. So these root verses are dealing with essential areas of Dharma life, not just impermanence, not just actual death, but also spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. And you can see each of the 6 bardos as an opportunity for transformation and liberation. And as Vidyadharka said, bardo literally means in between two, but not in a static sense. Life is dynamic, it's a flux, it's a constant flow of arising and passing conditions. So you could also translate bardo as the in-between becoming. And a bardo is essentially a situation where, at least to some extent, you're removed from everything that's familiar. It occurs when something's taken away from you, something that you identify with, something that you gain security from, and you're left suspended. You're left suspended in a sort of void. And it could be the breaking up of a relationship. It could be moving to a foreign country, maybe to teach the Dharma, where you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, everything's very unfamiliar. It could also be a solitary retreat. And I think it's also I think bardos occur quite naturally in our practice. You know, if we've been practicing the Dharma over a number of years, we've probably died and been reborn several times. You know, we've got to a point where the whole way that we practice just doesn't work anymore, and we're sort of left suspended, and we don't know what to do, and we're quite confused, quite disoriented, and all we can actually do is sit there and stay there until a deeper level of practice starts to emerge. And it's certainly my experience that happens again and again in spiritual life, that one's always recreating oneself, one's always recreating one's spiritual identity or non-identity and the way that you practice. And that's a good sign. It would be a real mistake if we settled down and that element of spiritual practice wasn't there. So these bardos, they're tremendous opportunities. They're these spaces where everything familiar is taken away, but also where all these different possibilities open up, because it means we can do something new. We can actually change. So they're to be valued and treasured if we can just recognize them. That's the crucial thing. If we can just recognize them as the opportunities that they are. So there are 6 bardos: the bardo of life, the dream bardo, the bardo of meditation or dhyana bardo, the bardo of the moment of death, the bardo of reality or dharmata, and the bardo of birth or rebecoming. And these 6 bardos are spaces, they're gaps, they're openings, where there's the opportunity of transformation, even liberation. And the root verses are pith teachings that actually tell us where to look in each of these situations in order to make spiritual progress. So they're pith teachings, they're pith instructions, which are pointing out to us where you actually need to look in each of these 6 bardos to to make full use of them and to make spiritual progress in them. So first of all, the Bardo of life. And I'm going to talk mostly about the Bardo of life, the first Bardo, because that's the one that we're in right now. And life is a Bardo. It's a gap between birth and death. It's a Bardo of becoming, because life is dynamic. And the Bardo of life is also of crucial importance because it's intermediate between the cyclical process and the spiral process. So in life, we have the option, we have the choice whether to pursue the spiral path or to continue around the wheel. So in that sense, it's a Bardo. And in a way, that's the most important sense, that it's a Bardo. In life, you have the choice between the reactive mind and the creative mind, between the wheel and the spiral. And it's in this life, from moment to moment, that a gap is opening up again and again between feeling and craving, where you can choose. You can choose how to respond. You're confronted with a choice to continue to go round the wheel or to ascend up the spiral. So you can see also the Bardos very much in terms of Praticca Samutpada, in terms of conditioned co-production. We're constantly recreating ourselves. We're constantly setting up conditions and recreating ourselves through our choices from moment to moment. And of course, very often, we're not aware of the choices that we make. So the crucial factor, of course, is awareness. And if we have awareness, the more awareness we have, the more choice. And there are certain situations where you are going to have more awareness. And one of those is a retreat like this one, because you've slowed everything right down and you've simplified your life. You've taken away everything that's familiar. You've turned off your computer and your mobile phone, I presume, and you're removed from your usual distractions. So you can also see a retreat as a Bardo. So we're making this choice from moment to moment, and as Dogen puts it, you are only alive right now. In a sense, we have only this present moment, and then another moment, and then another moment, and we keep making a choice from moment to moment. And the more we can bring into awareness, the more choice we have. Awareness is freedom, because awareness means choice. So there's an emphasis in all schools of Buddhism on experiencing this life as a precious opportunity. And it's so easy to forget. And I think it's very helpful sometimes just reflect on our own good fortune, the things that we actually take for granted usually. Being born a human being with a relatively healthy body and mind, in a stable society where it's easy to practice the Dharma. And by some miracle, we've encountered this teacher, Urgyen Sangharakshita, who's made the Dharma available to us in a way that we can understand and practice very fully in the West. And he's given us really important, really essential, effective practices and teachings. But not only that, he's created an order, he's created a Sangha, which is based on friendship, which gives support and encouragement. I just think it's incredible. If I stop and reflect, which I do sometimes, I find that it's difficult to imagine having better conditions for practicing the Dharma than I have right now. I feel incredibly fortunate to have been born at this point in time and to have come into contact with the Dharma through Urgyen Sangharakshita. And if I don't make the effort now, when will I have this opportunity again? I don't think it gets much better than this. I really don't think it gets much better than this. And I think we're in a position now in the West that where we've never been in before in terms of the opportunities to practice the Dharma, but having an effective path as well. And there's another translation of the Bardo of life, and it begins, "Alas, alas, now as the intermediate state of living arises before me, alas." And it's alas because these verses are all about samsara. They're all about samsara, the human condition, marked with impermanence, insubstantiality, and unsatisfactoriness. But at the same time, there's this tremendous opportunity. So the text says, "I will abandon laziness for which life has no time. And we need to make an effort. We really do need to make an effort. I don't think it's that we need to make a special effort, but we need to make a consistent effort. And we need to keep going. We need to make a consistent effort over years and decades and perhaps lifetimes. And it's that consistent effort that's going to make all the difference. And I was quite interesting. I was at our college meeting, and a couple of college members were leaving, and they'd done so much, but they didn't have any special talents. They were, in some ways, they could have been very ordinary people, but they had that determination and they made that consistent effort. So we just need to make a consistent effort. We need to make a consistent effort in this retreat, to be aware, to be as in emotionally positive states as we can be, to see things as clearly as we can, and so on. And last week I was listening to a talk by a buyer who actually died recently, and it was a talk on the imagination. And it's a beautiful talk. It's actually not a talk, it's an interview. It's an interview with Satyaraja. And he says a number of things. And Satyaraja asks him a question, and she says, have you got any advice for older order members? And he said, well, actually, for me, he was 80 when he gave this interview. He said, for me, the last 10 years have been the happiest of my life. But he said that may not be the same for everybody. Some order members who've had quite a pleasant life, quite an easy life for decades, may actually find old age quite difficult. And he said his advice was, just keep going. Just keep going. Yeah? That's all you need to do. You need to just keep going, just applying consistent effort. So the text goes on. I will enter undistractedly the path of study, reflecting and meditating. These, of course, are the 3 levels of wisdom. And we're going to be practicing these 3 levels of wisdom on this retreat. We'll be listening to or hearing the readings from the Bardo Thodol in the afternoons, and we'll be reflecting on that and on the root verses, and later the 6th element practice. And of course, we'll be doing a lot of meditation. And then it says, taking appearances and mind as the path, I will realize the 3 kayas. What does that mean? Taking appearances and mind as the path, I will realize the 3 kayas. I think what it means is that we live in a world of appearances. So it's not that things don't exist. It's not they don't have any existence, but they don't ultimately exist in the way that we think they do, in the way that they appear to us. They are actually impermanent and insubstantial. So appearances are, if you like, the objective pole. They're what we put outside us, and the mind is the subjective pole, and both are empty of permanent independent selfhood. So in a way, it's a Mahayana way of saying that subject and object are both impermanent, and because things are impermanent, because appearances and mind are empty, insubstantial and impermanent, it means we can change, we can transform ourselves, and it means we can develop the 3 kayas. Ultimately, we can develop the 3 bodies of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nimanakaya. So what it's saying is you take this as a path. So you take trying to see things in terms of impermanence, insubstantiality, dukkha, as a path. So we're not only practicing samatha meditation, we're also trying to see things as they really are. We're trying to see the true nature of appearances and of mind. So human life represents this rare and valuable opportunity. And we're lucky because we have all the conditions that we need to make substantial spiritual progress. All we have to do is make use of those conditions. So secondly, the dream bardo. And sleep is a bardo between 2 waking states. Going to sleep is compared to dying. When you go to sleep, you're letting go of holding on to waking life. And it's also a training for death. of letting go and maintaining awareness. That's what we're trying to do at death. We're trying to let go and maintain awareness. And the training here is to bring awareness into the dream state. And there's all sorts of practices in Tibetan Buddhism to do this. And it's in the dream state that it's possible to receive teachings in archetypal dreams. It's possible to have all sorts of visions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and even to gain liberation in the dream state. And I remember at the time when Bhante was handing over the headship of the order, he said that he was often having dreams of his teachers. So he was passing on the headship of the order, and night after night he'd have dreams of his teachers. And he took this to mean that they were affirming what he was doing. They thought what he was doing was a good thing. They were giving their blessings to what he was doing. So we can have all sorts of contact with teachers and so on in our dreams as well, and receive teachings. And Bhante recommends meditating or reciting a mantra before going to sleep as a way of maintaining continuity of practice through sleep. And you might want to try this on this retreat, going to sleep, reciting a mantra. So it's the last thing before you fall asleep. And when I lived at Vajraloka in the 90s, I sometimes found myself, when I was on retreat, meditating or doing puja or reciting a mantra in my dreams. And it was just because I was doing so much meditation during the day, it was starting to percolate through into the sleep state. I'm sure many of you have had that sort of experience, and you'll probably have it here too. But probably what's most important in dreams is when you find yourself deliberately behaving skillfully. So there's awareness there in the dream, and you choose to behave skillfully, because that means that your practice is starting to enter the depths of your mind. And as you get more deeply into the retreat and more deeply into the meditation and silence, I think what you'll find is that there's more continuity of awareness between waking and sleep. When you're doing more meditation and silence, the boundaries between the waking state and the sleep state start to become more fluid and permeable. Okay, thirdly, the dhyana bardo. And this, of course, is the bardo of meditation or of samadhi, and it's a state free from our usual distractions and illusions. And meditation is a bardo between two normal states of consciousness. And it's also a gap between two thoughts, because as the chattering mind starts to calm down, starts to slow down and quieten, there's a gap between thoughts, and there are periods of no thought in meditation. And the text says, "O now, when the dhyana bardo upon me is dawning, abandoning the whole mass of distractions and illusions." It's very important to be clear about what you're doing in meditation. And what you're doing is you are abandoning the hindrances. Some people are surprised that they can't get into dhyana, they can't experience higher states of consciousness, but they haven't actually decided to abandon the hindrances. So you need to be really clear that that's what you're doing. When you sit down to meditate, you need to make a clear intention that you're not going to follow the hindrances. When they arise, you're either going to let them go or you're going to apply an antidote. And you need to recognize when you're in a hindrance and when you're not. And this is something you can talk about in the meditation reviews, and maybe something I'll be saying something about. But the two are mutually exclusive. The hindrances and high states of consciousness are mutually exclusive. So you need to make a clear choice every time you sit down to meditate, and you need to keep making that choice again and again throughout the meditation practice. And I think part of the reason we don't abandon the hindrances is we don't have confidence in our meditation practice. We don't have confidence that if we do abandon the hindrances and we apply ourselves to the meditation, a richer, more deeply satisfying state is going to arise. And it's not very far away, it's just on the other side of the hindrances. So I think it's very important that we trust our meditation practice and we trust that we can actually make progress in meditation. Maybe that's something to talk about in the groups. But meditation's funny because sometimes it's quite counterintuitive, and you might be coming up against all sorts of resistances, and you think your meditation's terrible, but it might actually mean that you're on the edge of something, and your lower being is resisting. And so don't be too quick to judge your meditation practice. So much of meditation takes place below the surface of the mind. All we see is the tip of the iceberg. And Bhante's got this definition of dhyana, which I really like. And what he says is, dhyana is not a state in which we are, but a state in which we reorganize our being. Dhyana is not a state in which we are, but a state in which we reorganize our being. So I think you can have confidence that if you're applying yourself intelligently and appropriately to meditation, some transformation is going on. You can trust that. All you have to do is put in the work, and the rest will take care of itself. All you need to do is just apply yourself consistently and appropriately. And all that transformation is going on, and a lot of it we don't know anything about. A lot of transformation that happens on retreat we don't know anything about. We may know something about it afterwards, but there's a lot more going on than is happening on the surface. And I think we can trust that. And even when we're meeting resistance, maybe try to see that as a gateway, or guardians of a gateway, which are guarding a higher state or a transformation that's happening just on the other side of the gate. Okay, and then the text goes on, I will become firm in both the creation and perfected stages. Well, he's talking about sadhana practice here, visualization of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And there's two stages. The creation stage is where you set up the figure, you visualize the figure, you chant the verses, you chant the mantra, you receive blessings and so on. That's the creation state. The perfected state is when you become one with the visualized figure. So you become unified with the figure. You become Vajrasattva, or you become Green Tara, or maybe there's a ray of light coming from Padmasambhava, dissolves into a ball of light, and a hung shoots out and dissolves down through the crown of your head, or so on. But there's some sort of in every sadhana, whether it's implicit or explicit, there's a union with the Bodhisattva or the Buddha that you recognize, that you're meditating on. And this is really important with relevance to the bardos of death as well, because after death, in the bardo of reality, you're having these visions of the Buddhas, and you're trying to unify with them. So the more that you can unify with that embodiment of enlightenment, the Buddha or the Bodhisattva that you visualize as an order member, the more you'll be able to unify with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as they present themselves in the after-death state. So there's this correspondence between the bardo of meditation and the bardos before and after death. And Bhante has spoken of death as enforced meditation, and in both liberation are possible. And the more you're able to enter into reality, particularly through meditation in life, the better prepared you'll be to enter into reality and gain liberation at death. So I'm going to take the three bardos of the death process together and just make a couple of points that are common to them all. And we'll be saying more as the retreat goes on. So the three death bardos are, first of all, the bardo of the moment of death, with the eruption of the clear, brilliant white light of Dharmata, of reality. And the central point, of course, is to recognize this as the radiance of one's own pure mind. And it probably happens just for an instant, maybe a bit longer if you've been practicing in life, if you familiarized yourself with it. But if you're not able to recognize it, you feel overwhelmed, you shrink back, you fall into a swoon, and you wake up in a subtle mind-made body. And in that subtle mind-made body, you experience the appearance of the Buddhas and the six realms. And then the bardo of rebirth. Here, the possibilities of gaining liberation is becoming more distant. There's still the possibility there. And there's also the possibility, perhaps, to be able to direct your rebirth so that you come into contact again with the Dharma. So there's this progressive falling away from reality until you find your own level in the death bardos. And death is, of course, the most extreme of the bardos, where everything that we know, everything we think we are, everything we depend upon is taken away, which is also why it's a tremendous possibility if we can cooperate with the process of disillusion and not shrink back through fear. You feel confused, you feel disoriented, but everything is wide open. And in such a situation, you need a friend. You need a Kalyana Mitra. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead is also a book of friendship. So you need some help from your spiritual friend. And he's sitting beside you, traditionally, he's sitting beside you. He's reminding you that you're dead and that you need to find a path. You must seek a path. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or the Bardo Thodol, of course, means liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. And your Kalyana Mitra, sitting beside you, is speaking into your ear, is reminding you of your practice, saying focus on something that connects you with your practice, your yidam, some verses, a mantra, your teacher, Avalokiteshvara, and saying don't be afraid. Don't shrink back. Keep going. Recognize whatever appears as being the manifestations of your own true mind. Everything is falling apart. All your usual supports are taken away. But he's connecting you with what your heart knows is reliable. He's saying go for refuge to it. And he's also saying don't think of your faults. Don't dwell on your faults. Don't dwell on your unskillfulness. This is not the time to dwell on your faults. Focus on your virtuous actions. Focus on all the good deeds, all those little good Dharma deeds that you've done throughout your life that have accumulated into something quite large. Focus on that. So it's so easy to focus on our faults. And there's this practice, I think it's in the, I'm not sure where it is, it might be in the Visuddhimagga, it's in the Pali Canon, called recollection of virtues. And it's an actual practice where you sit down and you recollect your virtues. And I think it's a practice that should be much more widely known. I think we could all benefit from just recollecting our own virtues, recollecting all those skillful things, all those efforts to grow that we've made throughout our lives, which together amount to something. And of course, it's so easy to focus on our faults, to think ourselves as less than we are. But in a sense, it lets you off the hook. It can even be a form of laziness because it doesn't demand anything from you. So I think it's important to look at these principles that are contained within the root verses, but not to take the form too literally. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is obviously a myth. It's pointing beyond itself to some higher or deeper truth. But don't take it too literally. Don't literalize what's happening. The figures probably don't appear in this way. And of course, the 49 days is obviously a symbolic number, the 49 days in the Bardo, so it's 7 times 7. But the principles are important, and the principles we need to apply. And in Triratna, we don't generally do it in the way that it's outlined in the Bardo Thodol. Although I do know a few order members who have read the Bardo Thodol to a deceased friend. But we do have strong friendships. We do have strong friendships in Triratna, and we do have strong friendships in the order. And what's important is that the consciousness of the deceased person feels supported and is brought back to their Dharma practice. And I think we do this very well. And I was very moved yesterday when Vidyadhaka was talking about himself in Jnanavacha visiting Jayamitra. And I can think of plenty of other examples where we've really supported someone through the near-death process and death process itself. And I think of Subhadasi and Aryadasa and maybe others supporting Abhaya. And I think of Silapia and Mangala and others supporting Dayabandhu, who died very, very recently. So we do actually, I think we're very good on death, but we do it in our own way. And one of my first experiences when I was new to the FWBI, I think this is 1980, and some of you were probably there, I was living at Aryatara. I just moved into Aryatara, and I went to a funeral, a Buddhist funeral, and it was a funeral of Vangisa at the LBC. And he was a very popular, very prominent order member. He was a poet, he was an Irishman. He was very, very popular, had lots of friends. And I remember walking into the shrine room at the LBC, and the open coffin in the middle of the room in front of the shrine, and order members sitting around the coffin, and family and friends and so on. The whole shrine was packed, and there was, I think it was the morning, there was a whole morning of rejoicing in his merits, doing puja, doing metta bhavana for him, many, many things, you know, and just doing everything we could to support Vangisa's consciousness through the Bardo. And you don't have to be very sensitive to just pick up that there's a consciousness there, you know, that there's a consciousness there in the room, the consciousness of the deceased person. And I remember at the end of the ceremony, Vangisa's coffin was put into the back. I think it was an old Volvo estate. So it's put in the back of this old Volvo estate, and this huge bundle of Tibetan incense was tied onto the back with smoke pouring out everywhere. And this really motley collection of old vans and old cars following Vangisa down to the crematorium with all this incense pouring out, you know. But the whole occasion was joyful, and that's been my experience of Buddhist funerals. You know, that they're joyful occasions, and they're joyful because we have a vision of death. And I think we're so fortunate to have a vision of death, and a very, very positive vision of death. You know, death is not an end. Death is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to take a new body, to continue our work in some form or other. And when I lived at Aryatara, I also remember a mitra dying, a local mitra dying, and having his coffin in the shrine room, and coming down every morning to meditate, and the whole community sitting around the open coffin and doing metta bhavana towards him. And I think things were a bit freer in those days. We were able to do that sort of thing. But they're all very, very positive experiences. And then much more recently, and I'm sure most of you were there, there was Bhante's funeral, which I think is possibly the most important, well, one of the most important experiences of my life. And I definitely felt at that funeral that I was living in a myth. You know, something of importance to the whole universe had happened, you know, with Bhante's death. And at times it almost felt like taking part in, you know, a Mahayana Sutra or something like that. But perhaps more importantly, it was positive in another sense, in that I felt that at Bhante's funeral, the whole order was unified in a way that I'd never seen it before. You know, everybody was unified around the death of their teacher, and there was this incredible atmosphere there that we were all partaking in, and it was easy to see, you know, that how the bodhicitta could arise in a community of people practicing together. So Bhante himself suggested three things at the time of death, three things that we can do for a dead person at the time of death. And the first one was the metta bhavana. So he gave this talk called Fidelity, which was an important talk. And in that talk, he was saying that it's really important that we bear our friends in mind when they're not there. And he talked about the metta bhavana, and he said that many people find the metta bhavana difficult because we relate so much to the physical presence of people, but that we need to actually move our friendships onto the mental level. And you know this yourself. You can feel the presence of somebody who's not there, somebody who's living on the other side of the world through the metta bhavana practice. Metta transcends time and space, but metta also transcends death. And he suggested that the metta bhavana was a way of continuing our friendships beyond death. And I certainly find that if you bring people to mind in metta who have died, you feel their presence, you feel the connection with them. And of course, at the time of death, you can support them through the metta bhavana practice. And the second thing was the root verses. The root verses should be recited. And the third thing was the Vajrasattva mantra, which of course is associated with death, both physical death and also spiritual death and rebirth. And of course, the yidam, the mantra of the yidam, of the bodhisattva, or Buddha, that the dead order member visualizes, should also be recited a lot. And the Bardo Thodol stresses that it's very important to cultivate strong devotional feelings in the Bardo, so that you're drawn towards the Buddhas in the Bardo. So if you cultivate strong devotional feelings towards the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in life, it will put you in good stead at the time of death. And the Bodhisattva that order members meditate upon is connected with their ordination and with their private preceptor. And all these figures are manifestations of bodhicitta. They're myths. They occupy the realm of myth. In a way, when you do a sadhana practice, you're reenacting a mythic drama, and you're seeing reality in terms of a person, an enlightened person. And at death, it's going to be much, much easier to connect with a transcendental person or a myth than to connect with a concept. So I just want to make one more point just to finish. And I want to refer to a talk that Bhante gave in 2008. And it was a very intimate talk that he gave at the Sheffield Buddhist Centre. And it was called Dreams and Rebirth. And Bhante talked a lot about his dreams and about his own belief in rebirth. But at the end, he said that a belief in rebirth is problematic for some order members. And he said, if you don't believe in rebirth, if you don't have faith in rebirth, it can be a great strain because you feel you have to do it all right now. And it can create tension and anxiety, which can become problematic. So he suggested a middle way. And what he suggested is that we do all we can to make progress in this life, but not in too tense way, believing it's now or never. And he also suggested, as well as doing all we can to make progress in this life, that we keep in mind the possibility of rebirth. We don't close to the possibility of rebirth. And he goes on to say that we need to try to be clear if we accept the possibility of rebirth or not, because it will affect how we practice. So I think this is something to discuss in the groups. Are we clear? Are we able to accept the possibility of rebirth or not? Or how do we feel about the Buddhist teaching of rebirth? And lastly, to finish, many years ago when Dada Rinpoche was still alive, an order member, I think it was Amoghachita, went to see him at his school in Kalimpong, and he had a question to ask him. And it was a burning question. And he said, how can we be sure that we will contact the Dharma again in future lives? How can we be sure that we'll contact the Dharma again in future lives? And Dada Rinpoche was quite surprised by this question. And he said, well, how could you not? You've gone for refuge with Bhante Sangharakshita as your teacher. How could you not connect with the Dharma in future lives? And I think ordination, formally going for refuge, formally committing yourself to the three jewels, is a very weighty, skillful karma. I actually think that ordination prefigures insight. It's the same sort of experience. Not that I have that sort of insight, but from what I do know, I can imagine that it's the same sort of experience, because everything is involved. Everything is going for refuge at that point. The whole of you are present there in the ordination kuti. So you could say, and this is my last thing I'll say, you could say that the best preparation for death is the same as the best preparation in life, and that is to just keep going for refuge to the three jewels. If you keep going for refuge to the three jewels, you'll make the most of your life, you'll make a lot of people happy, and you'll be well prepared for death and for meeting the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas in the Bardo. Good.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you